That morning, the sky held a quiet kind of gray, not quite cloudy, not quite clear, like a secret still deciding whether to whisper or shout. In the chill of early spring, the trees stood motionless, their branches naked, not yet dressed for the season. A girl in a faded burgundy hoodie stood outside the gas station on Route 11. One hand curled around a warm styrofoam cup, the other gripping her backpack strap like it meant something more than just fabric. Her name was Grace Holloway, 17 years old. Brown hair, pale skin that turned pink in the wind, and eyes that always seemed to be studying the space just behind you. She lived in Eddystone, Pennsylvania, the kind of town that only seemed to exist when someone went missing or got arrested. The kind of place where the same 4 dogs barked all night and no one fixed their porch lights because they already knew who walked past and why. Grace had walked that path every day since she was a child, from her grandmother's porch to the old high school gymnasium, past the mill where her father used to work before his hands went too stiff to hold a wrench, past the river that shimmered like oil in the early hours and turned black by dusk. Nothing felt off that morning. At least, not yet. She smiled at the old man working the register, Mr. Danvers, who'd known her since she was 7 and still gave her a piece of licorice on Fridays. She made a joke about the weather, tossed her hair behind her shoulder, paid an exact change. No urgency, no clue, no goodbye. And then, at 7:14 a.m., she disappeared. Not like someone lost their way or wandered too far into the woods. No, she disappeared, like the air around her shifted like something swallowed her whole. The last person to see her was a mechanic named Jared Tills. He'd looked up from a carburetor just in time to see Grace walking toward the southbound exit, her back to the rising sun. She looked over her shoulder once and then kept walking. And that was it. One blink, one breath, and gone. No more footsteps, no scream, no clue. That day the world kept turning like it always does. School bells rang, phones buzzed, radios played commercials about spring sales. But in the Holloway household, something colder than silence took root. Her grandmother waited, watching the clock, muttering that Grace was just late. Maybe caught up. Maybe she stopped at the library. Maybe she ran into Melissa, that girl she used to be so close with. Maybe they were just talking, catching up. Maybe. But by 3 p.m., that hope began to shiver. By 6 p.m., it shattered. The police didn't treat it like an emergency at first. She's 17, they said. Not technically a minor. She's probably run off. Teenagers do this sometimes. But Grace wasn't like other teenagers. She didn't go to parties. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't even have a boyfriend. Her world was quiet books, sketch pads, long walks alone. She was cautious, careful. She never even crossed the street without looking both ways twice. And now she was missing. The investigation started slow, too slow. No CCTV footage from the gas station because the cameras hadn't worked since '96. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. Her cell phone, a cheap flip model from Radio Shack, was found tucked inside her backpack, which was left neatly beside the dumpster behind the station. Wallet untouched, keys missing. What kind of person leaves everything behind but takes the keys? Something didn't fit. And when her grandmother opened Grace's bedroom later that night, she found something else, her sketchbook lying open on the desk. A drawing in charcoal, smeared but still visible. It was of a girl standing in a forest, a shadow behind her. Not a person, not quite an animal. Just something. Watching. That drawing haunted everyone who saw it, not because it was terrifying, but because it looked like Grace had drawn herself with the same burgundy hoodie, the same messy ponytail. And behind her, a presence without a face. Something tall, hollow, and wrong. The next morning, a search party was formed. Dozens of volunteers, local news vans, dogs on leashes, flashlights, and maps. They combed through the woods. They dragged the river. They knocked on doors and questioned strangers. But they found nothing. No blood. No signs of a scuffle. No trail. It was like she'd walked out of frame. But the questions didn't end. In fact, they multiplied. Why did Grace look over her shoulder? Why did she take her keys but leave her phone? Why was her last drawing so unlike anything she'd ever made before? And why, when her grandmother opened her closet, were all of Grace's shoes still there, except for one pair? The red Converse, the ones she hadn't worn in years. The story of Grace Holloway was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The red Converse sat in the back of her closet for almost 2 years, untouched, dusty, their white rubber soles grayed with time. Grace hadn't worn them since she was 15, not since that summer when something changed in her, when she stopped going to sleepovers, stopped painting sunsets, stopped humming along to the old songs her grandmother played on the record player. And yet, those shoes were the only pair missing. The police didn't care. Not really. To them, it was just another line on the report. But to the people who knew her, who loved her, that detail felt like a whisper no one else could hear. The search faded quickly, like they always do. Within weeks, the posters began to peel from telephone poles. By June, the reward money had dried up. And by autumn, Grace Holloway was just a photograph behind glass in the diner on Main Street. A ghost in a hoodie, smiling with lips slightly parted, like she was about to say something she never got to finish. But her grandmother never stopped looking. Every Sunday she walked the riverbank. Same stretch, same routine. As if some part of her believed Grace had never gone far, that maybe she was out there watching, waiting. Caught between footsteps, caught between seconds. And then, in December of that same year, something strange happened. A local hiker, a man named Ian Copley, was walking along a trail about 5 miles outside Eddystone, not far from the abandoned railroad line. It had snowed the night before. The ground was fresh powder soft, clean. And then he saw them. Footprints. Small. Light. The kind you'd expect from a teenage girl. But they weren't recent. They shouldn't have been recent. They were the only prints in the snow, no starting point, no trail leading in just one single set of steps, appearing halfway up the hill as though the girl had dropped from the sky. And what's worse, the prints stopped, mid-path, half a step into the trees, just gone. No return prints, no animal interference, nothing, like someone walking across a page that just ended. When Ian reported the discovery, most people dismissed it as a hoax, or maybe a mistake. Snow can be deceptive after all. Melt patterns, ice, imprints. There were explanations, always explanations, but not to Grace's grandmother. When she heard the story, she didn't ask for photos or proof. She just nodded once like she had expected it all along. "She's moving," she whispered. "But she's not free yet. Not free yet." The words echoed in Ian's head for weeks. And then 3 months later, something else surfaced. This time, it wasn't a rumor. It was a VHS tape, found inside a shoebox behind a wall in the basement of an old hardware store being renovated 2 towns over. The tape was unlabeled. Old. Warped. No one knew how long it had been there. But when the footage was played, the air in the room changed. It was grainy, shaky, low res like it had been filmed on a camcorder from the late 90s. No timestamp, just the edge of a forest and a figure, a girl. She was walking slowly, 1 foot after another, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds like she knew someone was there. She was wearing a hoodie, burgundy, her hair in a loose ponytail, and on her feet unmistakably a pair of red Converse. At first the footage seemed normal, eerie, yes, but explainable. But then the camera panned slightly to the right, and for just 1 second, one flicker of a frame, something moved behind her. Something tall, thin, too tall, too still. Its shape blended into the trees, but its presence was undeniable. A vertical ripple in the forest, an absence in the shape of a figure. And then the tape ended, abruptly, as if someone had yanked the cord. The footage was analyzed, debunked, debated, but nothing ever explained what was on that film. No missing persons report matched the hardware store owner. No evidence linked the tape to Grace. But those who had known her, her former art teacher, her childhood friend Melissa, even the gas station clerk, all swore it was her. Same walk, same nervous glance over the shoulder, same silence. And something else too, something none of them could quite articulate. A look in her eyes. Not panic, not confusion. It was like resignation, as if she had known this would happen all along, as if whatever was behind her had been following her for much longer than anyone realized. After the tape surfaced, the town changed, not all at once, not in a way you could name. But if you lived there, you felt it. The nights grew quieter. People locked their doors earlier. Conversations dropped their warmth, became cautious, hushed. It wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about the idea of something else. Something that could still be watching. The police refused to reopen the case. Officially, it was still marked missing person. No leads. But unofficially, whispers were everywhere, even among officers. One detective, a woman named Ellen Roth, quietly pulled the original case file out of archives and started combing through it again, this time with a different eye. She wasn't from Eddystone. She transferred in the year after Grace vanished, but something about the case stayed with her. The strange gaps, the lack of cause, effect, or pattern. She'd worked runaways before, but this didn't feel like a runaway. This felt like a story written in reverse, like the end had come first, and no one knew where the beginning was. Ellen started with the drawing, the one of Grace in the woods, the shadow behind her. She took it to a forensic sketch analyst in Harrisburg, not to identify a suspect, but to ask a more uncomfortable question. Have you ever seen anything like this before? The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at the image. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside 6 other drawings. Different artists, different towns, different years, but all the same shape, all the same presence, faceless, vertical wrong. One was from a boy in Vermont missing since 1992, another from a college student in Missouri last seen in 2001. A third from a woman who was found but who wouldn't speak anymore, who simply sat in a care facility staring at corners, muttering the words, "It doesn't blink. It doesn't leave." Ellen didn't know what to make of it. She was a detective. Logic was her currency. But logic couldn't explain why the same figure appeared in multiple states, in multiple disappearances, long before social media or online forums existed to spread such imagery. She went back to Grace's belongings, dug through the cardboard box that held the girls' life school notebooks, bus passes, dried-out pens, crumpled receipts, and a single cassette tape. Handwritten on the label, "Dreams." When Ellen found a player that still worked, she sat in the silence of her car and listened. The tape was soft, scratchy. It sounded like Grace had recorded it late at night, whispering into the mic so no one else could hear. "I think it's following me again." I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just stress school stuff in my head. But I saw it again, in the mirror. Right before I turned the light on, it was there. It doesn't move like a person. It waits, like it's counting something, I've been drawing it so I don't forget. But it doesn't help. I think it's trying to make me leave. I think it needs me to go somewhere. And I'm scared. But also, I think part of me wants to know what happens if I do. Then silence. The tape kept spinning, hissing white noise. But Grace never spoke again. Ellen sat with her hands trembling. There was nothing in her training in her years of law enforcement that prepared her for a girl quietly admitting she was being lured, not taken, not chased, but pulled by something invisible. What disturbed her most wasn't the fear in Grace's voice. It was the calm, the resignation. Ellen tried to bring it to her superiors. The tape, the sketches, the VHS footage. They called it grief psychosis, teenage delusions, urban legend mania. They said, let it go. So she didn't ask again. But she didn't stop either. She went to the woods, the same trail where the footprints were found. She walked that path on a gray March morning, cold and wet, her boots pressing deep into the mud. And after 20 minutes, she found something lodged in the fork of a tree. A scrap of notebook paper faded brittle with water damage. 7 words written in Grace's handwriting. Behind me, not chasing. Just waiting. No one could explain how it survived the weather. No one could confirm the timeline. But Ellen knew the loops of that cursive, the way the G curved downward like a fishing hook. It was Grace's. The paper was sent for analysis, but the results were inconclusive. No fingerprints, no fibers, no useful evidence. But something else happened that day. Ellen never returned to work. She called in sick the next morning, and then again the next. Then silence. When officers visited her apartment, they found the door locked from the inside. Her keys were on the table, her coat still hanging by the door, the kettle still full of cold water. But she was gone. No signs of struggle, no signs of anything at all. Just one open sketchbook on the kitchen table, and a drawing. A forest, a figure, a woman walking, and behind her, once again, it. Before she vanished, long before the cameras caught glimpses or investigators followed trails through frozen woods, Grace Holloway was already disappearing. Not from sight, but from certainty. The signs were small at first details that at the time seemed like nothing. The way she'd wake up with the blankets twisted around her legs, even though she always went to bed neatly tucked. The way she kept her lamp on all night, a book on her chest, pages unread. Her grandmother noticed the change. But how do you ask a child about fear they haven't named? When Grace was 14, she stopped going to sleepovers. Not suddenly, gradually. One excuse, then another. Headaches, homework. She told Melissa she just wasn't into that stuff anymore. But the truth was heavier. She had started to hear things, not voices, not at first. Just sounds that didn't belong, breathing soft and rhythmic when she was alone in her room. The creak of a floorboard when everyone else was asleep. Once she woke to find her window open, the curtain billowing gently in the breeze. She lived on the 2nd floor, and she knew she had locked it. Her drawings began to change. She had always sketched quiet things, trees, birds, her grandmother's hands. But suddenly the margins were filling with strange shapes. Sharp angles, dark fields, vertical shadows with no source. Her art teacher praised the surrealism. Grace said nothing. Because how do you explain to someone that you're drawing what you see? She tried to rationalize it. She read books on psychology, asked her grandmother strange questions about hallucinations. She even wrote in her journal, "Maybe I'm dreaming or projecting. Maybe it's grief I haven't processed." Because by then her mother had already been gone for years. Not missing, just absent, swallowed by the haze of addiction memory and miles of silence. Grace barely remembered the day her mom left. just the red taillights fading down the road and the way her grandmother stood on the porch, hands clenched so tightly they went white. She didn't talk about her mom much. But sometimes when no one was around, Grace would lie under her bed and whisper apologies into the dust. Apologies for not remembering her scent, her voice, for not chasing after her that night. She didn't know it yet, but that wound was how it got in. The presence, the watcher, whatever it was. It didn't break doors or shout threats. It waited. It watched. It found cracks. And over time, it became harder and harder to tell what was inside her and what was outside. One night when she was 15, Grace had a dream, or thought she did. She was standing at the edge of a clearing surrounded by trees that bent inward as if leaning to listen. The air was thick, heavy, and in the distance, something was calling her not in words, but in thought. A pressure in her chest like gravity pulling sideways. She turned. Behind her stood it. No face, no arms, no identity. Just presence. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just understood something then, something wordless and awful. It didn't come to take her by force. It came to offer something, a trade. Freedom from the weight of the world she carried. An end to questions, silence, grief. It promised nothing. But it radiated completion. The dream ended when she stepped forward, and when she woke up, she found dirt under her fingernails. Real dirt. She hadn't left the house. She couldn't have. But she vomited in the sink and found pine needles stuck to the soles of her feet. That's when the drawing started changing again. No longer shadows, now doorways, archways of trees, hollowed trunks, tunnels of leaves leading into darkness. She would stare at them for hours, and once she whispered aloud, "Maybe it's not following me. Maybe it's guiding me." From that moment on, she stopped telling anyone what she felt, stopped fighting. Even Melissa noticed. She was quieter, she'd later say, like she'd made peace with something awful. When asked what that meant, Melissa hesitated. She said something to me once, the week before she disappeared. "I think there are some places people don't go missing by accident. I think they hear something the rest of us don't." The final confirmed sighting of Grace Holloway wasn't caught on video. It didn't come from a police report. It came from a boy, 13 years old, who hadn't spoken a word since. His name was Kevin Lorne. He and his father had been camping near Rivermouth Trail, deep woods, the kind with no cell signal, the kind where maps stopped being useful. That morning, Kevin wandered too far chasing a dragonfly. By the time his father caught up, Kevin was standing in a clearing, barefoot, pale as bone, his mouth open like he was trying to scream, but couldn't. When asked what happened, he said only one sentence: she didn't have to go in. He never explained who she was, never said the words again. But when investigators showed him a photo lineup, not suspects, just images of local teens who'd gone missing in the past 10 years, Kevin pointed to Grace and cried. What disturbed investigators more was the drawing Kevin made 2 days later in the hospital. It showed a forest, a stone archway, and a girl in a hoodie, standing in front of something tall, motionless, shadowed. But now, for the first time, it had eyes. 2 black ovals like bruises pressed into the world. And in those eyes, reflections, not of Grace, but of Kevin, watching her go. The story should have ended there. But it didn't, because the woods wouldn't stop talking. Over the next 2 years, hikers, not locals but outsiders, began reporting the same thing: a girl, just out of reach, always walking ahead, never looking back. They'd follow her voice thinking she needed help. They'd hear her footsteps always just around the bend. But when they reached the next clearing, she'd be gone. At first, these were dismissed as hallucinations, stress, dehydration, even mass suggestion once the story of Grace became internet folklore. But then a researcher from Ohio State University, Dr. Alice Trevors, conducted a low-profile study in Eddystone Woods. She wasn't a paranormal investigator. She was a linguist specializing in lost languages and pattern recognition. She wasn't looking for Grace. She was looking for a sound. What she found instead chilled her to the bone. Recordings from her field equipment placed randomly through the forest picked up audio not heard by the human ear. At 3:13 a.m., each night across 3 different days, her sensors recorded the same sound from 3 different locations. A voice, faint, female, saying the same sentence over and over in a cracked whisper, behind me, not chasing, just waiting. The same sentence Grace had once written on that brittle paper, the one found by Ellen Roth before she disappeared. Dr. Trevors brought her findings to a national conference. No one took it seriously, but 2 months later, she quit her position, sold her house, and vanished. Her last email: "There are sounds that don't come from us, sounds that want to be heard, and once you hear them, they stay." By now, the case of Grace Holloway had morphed from tragedy to legend, from search parties to message boards. She became a myth, a symbol of something too complex to name. But for her grandmother, it never became legend. It remained one thing: loss. Every year, on March 2nd, the day Grace vanished, she would leave the porch light on and place a cup of warm coffee by the window. Burgundy mug, no cream, no sugar. And one morning, 20 years after Grace vanished, the coffee was gone. No stain, no ring, just gone. And beside the empty windowsill, placed gently on the counter, a pair of red Converse, clean, dry, smelling faintly of pine. Her grandmother never spoke of it. She died the next spring quietly in her sleep. And when her neighbors cleaned out the house, they found a sketchbook under her pillow. Page after page of the same thing: Grace. Walking, always walking, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, but always with something behind her. There are stories that fade, the kind you tell once then let go, the kind you explain away with. And then there are stories like Grace Holloway's, stories that refuse to end. They do not beg to be solved, they simply remain, like fog over an empty field, like a footprint with no direction, like a name you remember for no reason at all. Some say she walked willingly into whatever took her. Others believe she was pulled by grief, by the ache of a mother who never came back, by a childhood spent too quiet, by a loneliness so deep it echoed. But maybe it wasn't just sadness. Maybe Grace understood something the rest of us are too afraid to see. That there are places not marked on any map, where the veil between here and there grows thin. Not just physical places, emotional ones. Wounds that fester long enough, pain that grows patient enough, fear that becomes still enough, can open doors. And sometimes, when the world becomes too loud, too cruel, some people hear the whisper, "Come," not as a threat, but an offer, an end to gravity, to searching, to the weight of being misunderstood. And Grace, in her silence, in her sketchbooks and soft footsteps, might have simply said yes, not because she wanted to die, but because she wanted to know what waited on the other side of all that watching, what lived in the spaces no one else saw. She's not the only one. Every few years a new story slips through. Another girl in a red coat, another boy in a forgotten town, someone leaving everything behind, no signs of struggle, no noise, just absence. And always their last seen looking over their shoulder, as if confirming that yes, it's still there, still waiting, and still watching. We try to forget. We build our lives around reason, routines, and rituals. We leave porch lights on not because we expect anyone to come home, but because we're afraid someone might. And when we walk alone, we pretend we're not listening. But late at night, when sleep won't come, when the house feels too quiet and the shadows feel too long, we sometimes remember her face. Not because we knew her, but because deep down we understand we could be Grace, and Grace could still be somewhere, just a few steps ahead, in the forest that doesn't end, on the trail that folds back into itself, still walking, still glancing back, still disappearing, not by force, not by violence, but by invitation. And every now and then, if the night is quiet enough, if the wind is still, if the woods are just the right kind of dark, you might hear it too. Behind me, not chasing, just waiting.